Inside the Pylon, a Midwest college football podcast, joined as always by Clinton Boring. My name is Ryan Satkoviak, and for the first part of this episode tonight, we are continuing our playoff preview extravaganza. We are joined by Jordan Hofeditz, who covers the SMU Mustangs. Jordan, thank you so much for making some time for us this evening, sir. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Thanks you guys for having me.
Clinton, sir, how are you?
I'm good, man. I didn't get to be a part of episode 1 last night of the playoff preview with the Indiana Hoosiers as we went a little early, but I'm happy to be alive, present, and ready to go for both episodes tonight.
This is going to be a fun one, man. I think we talked a little bit preseason about SMU, Clinton. I think both of us were high-ish on them in terms of how high you can be on a team moving up from the G5 to the Power 4. I don't know that either of us were 11-1 ACC regular season championship game participant, and 12-team playoff participant in year one, Jordan. But what's it been like covering this team and the ascent that they've made from, it's not like we're talking about a MAC team, no disrespect to the MAC. I mean, the American was and still is a pretty good conference, but to make that jump, to pay your own way to the ACC and to come in and performed really admirably in year one in the league.
It's been special. I mean, I think I give Coach Lashley and his staff a ton of credit because really when they came in, this is their third season. They've always kind of treated it like they are a Power 5 team. The way that they kind of go about their business, the way they have built their facilities, the way they manage their weight room, all of these things, they just never had that attached to it. And that for the longest time has kind of been the one thing missing. And finally, I think you can see that they had all this momentum, coming off an American championship and with the roster that they built with a lot of former P5 guys. And once you then attach that, power conference name to it, that just then, they got a couple high school commits and a couple high school flips, and then all of a sudden, you're getting guys that, didn't really see any playing time at the Power 5 school they were at, or all of a sudden you're getting some, Power 5, Power 4 backups that are transferring. And so, I mean, it's kind of like when you knock down that like last piece of the wall and it all just kind of falls down, and that's kind of what it's been like.
Early season, Jordan, SMU had prime stage early with that week 0 game against Nevada. And, Glenn and I are both listeners of the Solid Verbal, and one of their co-hosts was quite high on SMU coming into the year, saying, look at their schedule, look at what they're bringing back. This is a team that, if they get a couple of good breaks, that they're set up to maybe make a run in the ACC. And I remember sitting there watching that game against Nevada, one of the worst teams in FBS last year, and they really struggled in that game. And 2 weeks later, they lose to a BYU team that, again, was not particularly great last year. Now, obviously, that loss ended up aging a lot better than I think people thought. But then after that, you get the quarterback change. And I think at that point in the season, maybe a lot of people started to not necessarily write off SMU, but maybe sleep on them a little bit more than they had preseason. What has the switch from Preston Stone to Kevin Jennings meant for this team, for this offense, and their ability to put points on the board and move the football?
I think the biggest thing was it gave them an identity. Preston was the starter, but Kevin was still getting designated series, and I think they were just never really able to find a rhythm a little bit. And at that point, they were still kind of tinkering with the offensive line a little bit. And Kevin's more mobile. He's able to extend plays as you've seen throughout the season, just a little bit better. And so I think when they make the switch, and it's not only the move to Kevin, but it's also one guy, I think really kind of solidified the offense. They set their offensive line, and it was just kind of that starting point of this run that they've been on, since the BYU game, the bye week, and then, the winning streak that they took into that ACC championship game. So, I mean, I love Preston. I think he's going to find a spot to land and be really good. But what Kevin gives you is just the ability to do a lot of different things, and that's been special for them in their offense, and they've just been able to make a run with it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask before we really dive into the teams is we hear all this talk, this whole 3 weeks since 2.5, since the matchup has been announced. The Southern team's got to come play in the cold, play in the North. And not only added to that fact, SMU gets to come play at Penn State, the home of the whiteout, which it's not going to be the traditional whiteout, right? You don't get the night whiteout, but a noon whiteout. So on those two things, your thoughts on how, one, the cold may or may not affect SMU, and two, preparing for the environment that they're about to play in.
I think, the cold, it probably gets overblown because I remember, going into that Nevada game, it was going to be elevation, it was going to be cold, it was going to be rainy. It was brought up again going into the ACC Championship game, only conference championship game that's played at a neutral site that's outdoors. And obviously it's going to be brought up again. And I think a lot of it is compounded by just the fact that this team hasn't necessarily played well in it. You go back to the last year's Fenway Bowl in Boston where it was cold and rainy. And so I think for better or worse, I think they also kind of have brought that on themselves and have kind of self-perpetuated that a little bit. It's going to be different. I mean, yesterday morning we were getting dressed and getting the boys dressed for school, and it's 96% humidity.
Oh my God.
I mean, you just can't replicate the cold. Obviously, I mean, it's been colder here, but you can't replicate that. But also you're living in an age where they're going to have heaters and they're going to have, every piece of Nike cold weather equipment that they make. I think it's definitely a component. I don't think you can ignore it. Mm-hmm. I think it probably does just get a little overblown a little bit, though.
And what about facing the whiteout?
Yeah, whiteout, no whiteout. This will be the biggest atmosphere that they've played in a long time, period. I mean, you can go back to, last year they played at Oklahoma, but that was a regular season non-conference game in Norman. It's hard to say that they were really, hyped up, amped up for that game. You get the TCU game generally every other year that's played in Fort Worth. Again, it's a rivalry game, but TCU obviously doesn't see it much as a rivalry since they're canceling the series and all of that. So that's hard to judge. ACC Championship Game, sure, it was probably plus Clemson fans in the stands on that one, but it was not a Clemson home game. Mm-hmm. I don't even know if in almost my lifetime, if they've played a game in this kind of environment, and certainly of this magnitude. And so it will be interesting to see how they handle it. It's going to be loud. It's going to be very anti-SMU. I mean, they talk about using that and kind of, when they boo and all that stuff. But this will be different. And I think that's just another piece, like with the cold weather, might get overblown a little bit, but it's definitely a piece of it that they're going to have to adjust to, and that they're going to have to find a way to overcome in some ways.
Yeah, I want to kind of build off that big game talk there, Jordan, because when we have a format like this, it's, every game's the biggest game of your life until the next one, and there's always one that comes after it. And I think looking to a couple weeks ago against the ACC title game, that certainly probably applied to most, if not all, of the players on this team, right? You got a chance to play for a conference championship. You're playing a Clemson team that, sure, they kind of backdoored their way into the game, but it's still Dabo on the other sidelines. It's the Clemson brand, the orange jerseys, the paw print helmets, a team that, in the recent history of college football has been one of the barons of the sport. And SMU did everything they could to spot them that game early, right? 14-0, 5 minutes into the game. And, it's not the first time this year we've seen this team be resilient, come from behind. But I would argue that's not something you necessarily want to do going onto the road in Happy Valley. 106,000 fans into the game, give them a reason to get juiced early. What went wrong? I mean, we watched the game, right? There were some turnovers, but what went wrong early in that game, you think, and how was that team able to kind of respond to make it a game?
I mean, obviously the turnovers. I think you look at even the BYU game that they lost, there were a couple bad turnovers in that game. Obviously, the Duke game, anytime you have 6 turnovers in a game. But I think the Duke game is what you see is, it was never a moment that I felt like Kevin was going to be pulled out of that game because of the turnovers. It was never a moment where I felt like the defense was going to say, "Oh, well, the first 4 turnovers, yeah, we'll try and play great defense and stop them." But after that 5th one, no, we're not going to try and pick them up. That's just what they do. They've built such a brand of complementary football, where the defense has been bad at SMU for a really long time. And when Coach Lashley brought in Scott Simons, he brought him in to do what he's done and give them a top 30 defense back-to-back years, and to give a defense that the offense doesn't have to score 50 every single time out to have a chance. And so I think that's what you've seen. I think you saw a defense that was put in a couple bad situations early, and obviously gave up those touchdowns, but that wasn't going to say, "Oh, well, it's just not our night." They were going to say, "No, we're going to prove what we've done all season." And they, really shut down that Clemson offense from there. I think you saw what the SMU offense can be when they don't turn the ball over. They're really good at, they can move the ball down the field if they have to. They can take a shot on you if you are caught sleeping a little bit. And so I think that's what gives this team that ability, is just the way that the offense and defense. And I mean, shoot, Colin Rogers has been named an All-American now by 2 entities. So I mean, they've got a kicking game and a kicker that can deliver from long range and is consistent for you. And so I just think they've done such a good job of making the pieces fit together, and then just kind of a little bit of trust and a lot of coaching to say, this is what we worked all week, all month, all year, all season, your entire career for, was to get to these moments, and we trust you now in these moments to get the job done.
And to kind of keep playing off the defensive talk there, SMU boasts the nation's 4th best run defense, averaging or allowing only 93.4 yards per game. However, Penn State just faced a top 10 run defense themselves in Oregon in the Big Ten Championship and ran for 297 yards. Now, part of that rushing attack is now gone, as Bo Prabula has entered the transfer portal and is no longer with the team or for the playoff. So kind of how do you expect SMU to fare against this rushing attack? And then if you could, give us a couple guys on the defense who we can keep our eyes out for to watch.
Sure. I think, the defensive line was really kind of, in a way, a question mark. They had their top guy in Elijah Roberts coming back, who's more of an end, but they do move him inside in some situations. But they lost a lot of their meat in the middle, and they hit the portal hard and brought in a lot of bodies. And I think that's been one of the strengths, is they're talented. I'm not taking anything away from that, but their ability to go 2 deep, 3 deep to an extent, and rotate guys and not let their 300-pound defensive tackles be out there kind of on an island for long stretches, has been really big. And so that's been a key for them. I think the fact that really their edge guy, pass rusher guys are also really good run defense guys helps. You aren't losing a lot if you have those guys out there to rush the quarterback and either he gets away or it's a run play. I think that they can still kind of find those positions to probably not make the play themselves, but not leave the other guys out on an island themselves. And so I don't know. Again, I mean, this is probably the best run team that they'll play, or that they have played so far. And so again, a lot's gonna be asked of them. They're gonna have to step up and show they can. But their ability, like I mentioned, Elijah Roberts, Jafari Harvey is their other end, who's just had a great season for them. Those two kind of bookending Tank Booker, Corey Roberson, Mike Lockhart gets in there. They have Jonathan Jefferson are probably their top 4 guys. on that inside, and they're just able to eat up blocks. They aren't going to have a ton of stats, but it's probably a big reason why their linebackers have as many tackles as they do, because those guys just occupy people and don't let the offensive line get to that next level. And so I think that's going to be the key, is that that front four is going to have to do a really good job of keeping guys, that linebacker group, Kobe Wilson and Ahmad Walker, who have just been so good for them really the last 2 years, but especially this season, stepping up in competition level to be able to just make play after play after play.
And speaking of stepping up competition level, looking at the opposite side of the ball, facing this Penn State defense, and certainly Abdul Carter makes a lot of the headlines. But I'm fascinated by this SMU offense, and I'm not like knee deep in the stats on a lot of different teams, so maybe this is more likely than I'm making it out to be. But I don't know how typical it is to see a team throw for almost 3,500 yards and not have a single receiver over 40 catches. And certainly some of that has to do with RJ Maryland's midseason injury. He was having a fantastic year, and certainly he probably would have hit that mark had he stayed healthy. But what makes this offense be able to be so dynamic without really having that go-to guy out wide?
Well, it's really funny because 2 years ago they had Rashee Rice, who led the country in receptions and yards, I believe. So they really, he was it in their passing game for the most part. Then the last 2 years, last year they didn't have a 100-yard receiver in a game until the final game of the regular season. And so they've just been able to do it with a lot of guys in a lot of different ways. Sometimes that's maybe hurt to not say, okay, we need to put this drive together. We need these plays. Who's the one guy we know can get open every single time we can get him the ball? But also, if you're a defense, who do you put your best guy on? Because there is so much talent across the board, and there isn't that guy that you can say, okay, they need a pass play here. This is definitely who they're going to. So I think that's been part of it. I think, and you look at it, because they have RJ Maryland, who is their leading receiver, go down. The next game, their next leading receiver goes down. They have to take a ton of credit. Roderick Daniels Jr., local kid, slot receiver. They were thin at running back, so they move him to running back. It was the Duke game that Jake Bailey got hurt in. They move him back to slot receiver after not practicing there for a couple weeks. Had 2 60-plus catches and a touchdown that without him making those plays, they don't pull out that win. So it's just been a lot of different guys stepping up in a lot of different ways. And while it might hurt the offense a little bit to not have that go-to guy in those moments, the defense also doesn't, necessarily know who to put their top guy on either.
And, you see a lot of these lists coming out on the Twitter, and it's, people ranking position groups and, best players in the playoff, yada, 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 best running backs in the playoff. And there's certainly a lot of really good running backs in this playoff. And I think a guy who's flying under the radar and who a lot of people are going to become quite familiar with Saturday is Brashard Smith, who's been just incredible for them, not only running the ball, but also out of the backfield. With his ability and, the running threat that they have with Jennings, for our listeners who, more Midwest-based might not be as familiar with ACC football, how do they utilize, Smith and Jennings in the run game, and how could that potentially present a challenge for Penn State this weekend?
The biggest thing with Smith is they're able to do so many things with him. There's a lot of, he was a wide receiver when he was at Miami. They bring him in not needing another wide receiver, saying kind of, hey, we're going to try this out at running back and see what happens. Well, they get, 2 of their backs hurt during fall camp. One comes back, another one gets hurt with a season-ending injury, and he kind of goes from, hey, he might be a piece that works in here, to their featured back. And so with his wide receiver experience, that gives them kind of some different wrinkles that they can have to it. I think the interesting thing with Jennings in the run game is he is a dual threat quarterback who has such an ability to run, but he's still a pass first guy. I think what I think it's what Saban talked about. One of his game day things he did on Kevin was his ability to scramble and keep his eyes downfield and still find receivers and not just make careless throws or, at the first sign of trouble, tuck it and run, that he's still trying to make the play that was called happen, which then makes it even more dangerous when he does tuck it and run it, because he's usually gone through all of his options. And if then running the ball is the best option, or the only option, it's because there's a seam or there's an opening or there's a something he can make a play out of. And so I think that's where he becomes really dangerous in the running game, because he isn't going to run just for the sake of running. He's going to let the play unfold and have running be an option. And if he's going to take it, then that's the best option for him. And I think that's tough for defenses to say, this is a running quarterback. The second he's out of the pocket, he's going to take off with it, go get him, because that's not necessarily the case with him.
As we kind of look at the overarching piece here, is if SMU, let me backtrack. A lot of people I feel like aren't giving SMU a huge chance in this game, at least in Big Ten country where I reside. So, Jordan, in your opinion, what are a couple keys? Let's say 2 keys to this game if SMU is going to pull off the win.
Don't turn the ball over. And even to an extent you can, but let's not do it a couple times in the first handful of drives in their territory, because this team has proven that they can have a couple turnovers here and there and still win. But I think, especially, again, we talked about environment and everything, you can't have a couple early bad turnovers that lead to points and get yourself in an early hole. And then again, like I think they've got to stop the run. It's what they've hung their hat on defense all year long. It's what has led to a lot of their success, has been able to stop the run, especially, on like some first and second downs, and put the other team in some obvious passing situations and let those edge rushers kind of go to town on the quarterback. So really, I mean, it's what they've been able to do all season, and really hold on, take care of the ball, and stop the run, and that really will give them their best chance to pull off this upset.
And then other side of that coin, Jordan, is there a matchup or an aspect of this game, either how SMU matches up against Penn State or vice versa, that you're kind of eyeballing as, if there's a way that Penn State is going to be able to exploit the ponies in this one, that this is probably the area in which it happens?
It's been kind of harped on a lot this season on the SMU side. It's going to be their corners. It's probably not fair because of how strong the defensive line and linebackers and safety group is, and they're veterans and they played a ton last year, but the corners are both new starters this year. There's been some movement on who's the starter and who gets more snaps. They had one of their veterans enter the transfer portal mid-season. And so it's a unit that they've really had to work with and had to work to put together. And it's probably the weak link of that defense, which, again, and I'm not necessarily saying they're not good, but when the defense has been as strong as it has, that's kind of where that moniker is going to land. And so I think the big problem is going to be if SMU's not able to get Penn State into obvious passing situations where they're able to get a good pass rush going, or if they're not able to stop the run and really have to bring up some safeties and maybe do some blitzing and other things, that they're going to get those corners on islands and in a lot of one-on-ones that I don't know that they necessarily want to be in. I think that's one area where if the defense isn't able to do some of the things that they've been so good at, it might get that group exposed a little bit. I think that would be probably on the defensive side, probably your biggest concern there.
Gotcha. Well, Jordan, we are very much looking forward to this game. Saturday, kicking the day off right, man, in Happy Valley, SMU in the 12-team playoff. Great story this year. Looking forward to seeing this next chapter unfold Saturday. Thank you, sir, so much for joining us this evening. Hope hopefully a good game for you to watch. Are you getting a chance to go to the game or?
No, I won't be at this one. I've really got my fingers crossed they can pull it out because I think there's a decent chance I'll be able to make it to Phoenix for the Fiesta Bowl. So
That'd be sweet.
holding out some hope on that end.
All right, sir. Well, thank you again for joining
you,
us
Jordan.
this evening.
Thank you so much, guys.
All right, and is this going to do this again tonight? It's probably going to do it
Gonna
again
delay it.
tonight.